Mara woke to a silence so heavy that it pressed against her ears. She opened her eyes slowly and tried to remember where she was. The last thing she remembered was the blinding storm outside her ship, the violent shaking, and then the lights went out. Now she was lying on the cold ground, dust clinging to her clothes, and the wreckage of her ship lay scattered across the barren landscape. The sky above was a strange mix of purple and orange, a color she had never seen before. Two suns hung in the distance, small and weak, giving only a dim light. The air was thin and dry, and every breath felt like swallowing sand. Mara sat up carefully, her body aching from the crash, and looked around. The terrain was jagged, with tall rocks rising like silent sentinels. Small clouds of dust blew across the ground, and she noticed strange tracks etched into the dirt. They looked like the marks of some animal she had never seen. Her stomach growled, a sharp reminder that she had eaten nothing since the storm began. Mara reached into her backpack and found a small ration pack. It was only enough for one meal, and it would barely keep her alive. She unwrapped it and ate slowly, savoring each bite, though the flavor was bland and strange. Hunger gnawed at her, but fear gnawed even more. She had no way to know if she was the only living being on this planet, or if some predator was watching from the shadows. After a few moments, Mara stood, forcing herself to focus. Sitting and waiting would not help her. She needed to find water, shelter, and a way to signal for help. Her ship, now broken and half buried in the sand, could not be repaired without tools she no longer had. She walked cautiously toward the remains, checking each piece for anything useful. Pieces of metal, wires, and damaged circuits littered the ground. Mara picked up what she could carry, thinking she might be able to use them later for survival. The wind picked up, whipping against her face, and she felt a chill despite the thin warmth from the suns. She pulled her jacket tighter and moved forward. The landscape seemed endless, a lonely desert of rocks and dust. Every step made her wonder if she was walking in circles. Her mind raced with questions she had no answers for. How long had she been here? Would anyone come looking for her? Could she survive alone in this strange place? As she walked, Mara noticed strange shapes moving in the distance. At first, she thought they were illusions caused by heat or light, but they grew closer, solidifying into forms. Her heart raced. Were they creatures? Or worse, sentient beings who might not be friendly? Mara slowed her steps, careful not to make noise. She crouched behind a rock and watched. Then she saw something that made her stop completely. It was not a creature, not something dangerous or threatening. It was a small child. The child appeared no older than 7 or 8, with wide, curious eyes and a thin frame. The child wore simple clothing made from leaves and soft fabrics, completely different from anything Mara had ever seen. The child looked lost, frightened, and alone. Mara's first instinct was caution. She had no idea if this child was dangerous, or if the planet itself was dangerous to the child. But as she watched, she noticed the child was shivering, and her heart softened. She had been alone herself, hungry and scared. She understood what it meant to be lost and without hope. Mara stepped out slowly, careful to show she meant no harm. "Hello," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. The child flinched but did not run. Mara took another step, then another. The child looked at her, eyes wide with fear but also with something else. Curiosity. Mara crouched down to appear smaller, less threatening. "My name is Mara. Are you alone?" she asked. The child hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft it barely reached her ears, the child spoke a few words she could not understand. Mara frowned. The language was strange, but the tone was gentle, almost musical. She smiled slightly and tried again. "I don't understand, but I won't hurt you. I'm hungry too. Maybe we can share?" The child's eyes lit up briefly, a small flicker of hope shining in them. The child nodded slowly, then reached into a small bag and pulled out a few pieces of dried fruit. Mara's heart warmed. It was not much, but it was an offering of trust. She accepted it gratefully, breaking the pieces into smaller bites so they could eat together. As they ate, Mara observed the child. The child's hands were small and delicate but strong. The child's eyes were bright, filled with intelligence and curiosity. Mara realized that despite the harsh environment, this child had survived here alone. She felt a mix of awe and concern. How had this child survived, and what dangers had they faced? After eating, Mara tried to communicate again. She drew simple shapes in the dirt, circles, lines, and arrows, pointing to water, food, and shelter. The child watched closely, mimicking her gestures. It was slow, but a connection was forming. Mara smiled, feeling a spark of hope. Maybe she was not alone after all. The sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of deep purple and orange. Shadows grew long, and the temperature dropped quickly. Mara knew they needed shelter for the night. She looked around and saw a small cave hidden behind a rock formation. It was dark and narrow, but it would protect them from the wind and any predators. She pointed to the cave and gestured for the child to follow. The child nodded and ran ahead, excited to find a safe place. Mara followed, keeping close. Inside, the cave was cool and smelled faintly of earth. Mara started a small fire using sparks from some metal shards she had collected. The fire was weak but enough to provide warmth. The child watched in fascination, eyes wide as the tiny flames flickered. Mara smiled, feeling a sense of accomplishment. She had survived the first day, and now she was not alone. As night fell, Mara and the child sat close to the fire. The child's name, she learned, was Liko, though Mara struggled to pronounce it. They could not speak each other's language, but gestures, expressions, and shared food created a bridge between them. Mara felt something she had not felt in a long time: hope. She thought about the journey ahead. Survival would not be easy. Food was scarce, water even scarcer, and the planet's dangers were unknown. But with Liko by her side, she felt a determination she had not felt before. The child's presence reminded her of home, of family, and of the human spirit's ability to endure even in the harshest conditions. Before sleeping, Mara looked at Liko and whispered, "We will survive, I promise." The child smiled faintly, closing their eyes as the firelight danced across their face. Mara stayed awake for a while longer, listening to the wind, thinking of the stars above, and planning the next day's journey. She knew the path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since the crash, she did not feel completely hopeless. Alone, no longer, Mara realized that sometimes, even in the vast emptiness of space, hope could come in the smallest forms: a child's words, a simple act of sharing, a flicker of trust. It could change everything. And as she drifted into a light sleep, she felt a strange sense of peace, knowing that tomorrow they would face the planet together. The stars shone above like distant promises, and Mara felt ready to reach for them. The next morning, Mara woke to a quiet world. The two suns had risen, casting a soft orange glow across the barren landscape. She looked at Liko, who was already awake and staring curiously at a small lizard-like creature creeping along the cave wall. Mara smiled faintly. The child's curiosity never seemed to end. Mara knew they could not stay in the cave forever. Food and water were limited, and the planet offered no safety if they stayed in one place. She needed to find a source of water and a place where they could survive longer. She packed the little belongings she had salvaged from the ship and gestured for Liko to follow. Liko grabbed a small satchel that had become his most prized possession. A few pieces of dried fruit, a tiny wooden figure, and a small shiny stone he had found. The child's eyes sparkled as he followed Mara out into the open. The wind whipped against their faces, carrying the dry scent of dust and rock. Mara felt it prick her skin, but she ignored it. The journey ahead would be hard, but it was better than remaining trapped in the cave. As they walked, Mara tried again to communicate. She pointed to herself and said, "Mara," then pointed to the child and said, "Liko." The child repeated the name slowly, his tongue rolling over the syllables in a clumsy but earnest attempt. Mara laughed softly. The first steps toward understanding were small, but they were real. They traveled across a rocky plain, following what Mara hoped was a path toward water. She marked their steps with small piles of stones, just in case they needed to retrace their journey. Liko watched her carefully, his small hand brushing over each pile as if understanding its purpose. Occasionally, the child would run ahead to pick up a strange plant or examine an odd-shaped rock, calling Mara's attention with bright eyes and excited gestures. Mara felt a warmth in her chest. Even in this harsh place, life, curious and vibrant, continued to exist. After several hours, their path became more difficult. Jagged cliffs rose before them, and narrow passes forced them to move carefully. Mara helped Liko over rocks, showing patience and care, while Liko guided her around loose stones and hidden crevices. Slowly, Mara realized that Liko seemed to understand the land better than she did. The child's instincts were sharp, and Mara had to remind herself not to underestimate the small frame before her. By midday, their journey was interrupted by the sound of movement in the distance. Mara froze, her senses alert. She strained her eyes, searching the horizon, and saw a shadow flicker among the rocks. Her heart raced. Could it be another human, or a predator native to this planet? Liko, sensing her tension, grabbed her hand tightly. His small fingers squeezed hers, a silent message. They faced it together. The shadow revealed itself to be harmless. After all, a herd of small, four-legged creatures with glowing eyes that reflected the sun's light. They moved quickly, their bodies low to the ground. Mara watched them carefully, noting their movements and behavior. Liko laughed softly, clapping his hands. Mara couldn't help but smile at the child's innocent joy. Even in a place filled with danger, wonder could still exist. As the suns moved across the sky, Mara and Liko continued their trek. Hunger gnawed at her again, and she noticed Liko nibbling slowly on the dried fruit. Mara reached into her bag and shared her last ration. "We need to save some," she said, though her stomach protested. Liko nodded, understanding enough to take small bites. The trust between them was growing, and Mara felt a renewed sense of responsibility. She was no longer just fighting for herself. She had someone else to protect. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking a valley. Mara's eyes widened at the sight below. A small river wound through the landscape, its water sparkling under the sun's light. Trees with pale green leaves grew along its banks, and patches of soft grass offered a hint of safety and comfort. Mara's heart leapt. They had found water. Life, fragile and hidden, existed here, and it gave her hope. She gestured to Liko, pointing at the river, and made a drinking motion. The child's eyes lit up with excitement. Mara motioned for him to follow her down the slope, moving carefully to avoid slipping. Together they descended into the valley. Mara knelt by the river, cupping her hands to drink. The water was cool, refreshing, and sweet with life. She offered her hands to Liko, and the child eagerly drank, splashing water on his face and laughing. Mara laughed too, the sound echoing across the quiet valley. After drinking, Mara knew they needed to find shelter before nightfall. She spotted a small grove of trees and bushes near the riverbank. Though not a cave, it would offer some protection from the wind and the planet's strange predators. They made their way there, gathering dry branches and leaves to create a small campfire. Mara used her engineering knowledge to spark a fire, careful not to harm the environment. The flames flickered to life, casting warm light on their faces. Liko stared in awe, clapping his hands as if witnessing magic. As the fire crackled, Mara took the time to observe the child. Liko was restless, fidgeting with his satchel, picking up stones and small twigs and arranging them in patterns on the ground. Mara realized he was learning, experimenting, and trying to make sense of the world just as she was. She felt a deep admiration for the child's intelligence and resilience. Despite his small size and young age, Liko had survived alone on this harsh planet, and he had a spark of curiosity and courage that reminded Mara of the best parts of humanity. That night, as the two sat by the fire, Mara tried another method of communication. She drew pictures in the dirt, circles for water, triangles for shelter, lines for paths. Liko watched closely, his small hand mimicking her movements. Slowly, he began to understand the shapes, pointing to them and repeating the gestures. Communication was becoming possible, not through words, but through understanding and shared experience. Mara felt a sense of pride and relief. They were building a bond stronger than language itself. The night grew colder, and Mara wrapped herself and the child in a blanket she had salvaged from her ship. Liko rested his head on her lap, and Mara stroked his hair gently. She thought about the days ahead. The journey to safety would be long and challenges would come. Predators, hunger, storms, and unknown dangers. But she no longer felt alone. Liko's presence reminded her that hope and kindness could exist even in the darkest places. Before closing her eyes, Mara whispered, "Tomorrow, we will explore the river. Maybe we can find food. Maybe we can find more signs of life." Liko smiled, his small hand clutching hers. The child's laughter and trust were a balm to Mara's weary soul. For the first time since the crash, she truly believed they could survive. As sleep overtook her, Mara reflected on what had brought her here. She had trained her entire life for exploration, for discovery, for challenges, but nothing had prepared her for the loneliness, the fear, and the hunger she now faced. And yet it was not skill or technology alone that had given her hope. It was the child, small and fragile, yet full of life. Liko's simple words and gestures had reminded her of the power of connection, of empathy, and of courage. In the quiet of the night, with the stars shining brightly above, Mara realized something profound. Survival was not just about strength or knowledge. It was about trust, compassion, and the willingness to see hope where others might see despair. And with Liko by her side, Mara felt ready to face whatever the planet could throw at them. The bond between the human and the alien child grew stronger with every passing hour. Mara knew that no matter how difficult the days ahead would be, she had someone to fight for, and that gave her strength. In the distance, strange noises echoed across the valley, but Mara no longer felt fear. Together they were capable of more than she had ever imagined, and as the night deepened, Mara whispered softly to Liko, "You are not alone, and neither am I." The child smiled in sleep, and Mara allowed herself a small smile as well. The journey was just beginning, and already the world seemed a little less empty, a little more full of possibilities. For the first time in a long time, Mara truly believed that tomorrow would be better. The next morning, Mara awoke to the soft hum of life around the riverbank. Birds with translucent feathers chirped softly in the alien trees, and small creatures scuttled along the ground, leaving tiny tracks in the dirt. Liko was already awake, sitting cross-legged by the river, carefully arranging stones in patterns that fascinated him. His small hands moved quickly, placing one stone beside another, creating shapes that seemed almost like writing. Mara watched for a moment, marveling at his patience and intelligence. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. Liko looked up and smiled, a shy, bright smile that made Mara's heart lift. She noticed his eyes flick to the river, and she realized he was ready to start their day. Mara nodded, pointing to the water. Liko immediately jumped up and ran to the river, scooping up water in his small hands. Mara followed slowly, careful not to rush him. Today, she decided they would explore farther than before. Survival required more than food and water. They needed shelter, knowledge of the land, and an understanding of potential threats. Mara pointed to the distant cliffs, drawing a line from their current spot to the base of the rocks. Liko's eyes followed, and he nodded, seeming to understand that this was their goal. As they walked, Mara noticed how Liko moved with a strange confidence. The child had survived alone in this harsh environment, and it showed in every careful step and every glance at the surroundings. Liko would stop to point out edible plants, small streams, or strange animal tracks. Mara realized that the child's instincts were sharper than hers. She had relied on her training and technology, but Liko relied on observation and intuition. The day passed with both challenge and discovery. Mara found herself explaining simple things to Liko through gestures and drawings in the dirt. She taught him to identify safe plants, to build small traps for food, and to recognize signs of danger. Liko absorbed every lesson eagerly, his bright eyes shining with curiosity. In turn, Liko taught Mara how to read the land in ways she had never considered. He showed her hidden paths through rocks, how to follow water trails, and even how to spot the faint signs of creatures that hid in the shadows. By late afternoon, they came across a narrow canyon. The walls of the canyon rose high above them, casting long shadows across the dry riverbed. Mara knew they would have to be careful. The canyon could hide predators, and the uneven ground could be dangerous. Liko, sensing her caution, stayed close, holding her hand tightly. Mara felt the weight of responsibility in that small hand. Protecting him was no longer optional. It was everything. Suddenly, a noise echoed through the canyon, a low rumbling growl that vibrated through the ground. Mara froze, Her heart raced. She scanned the canyon walls, searching for the source. A shadow moved quickly across the rocks, and Mara realized they were being watched. Liko clutched her hand, his small fingers trembling slightly. Mara bent down to his level, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Stay close to me," she whispered. "We will be okay." The shadow emerged into the light. It was a creature unlike any Mara had seen before. Its body was long and lithe, covered in shimmering scales that reflected the sun's light. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its claws dug into the rock as it moved with silent, deadly grace. Mara's mind raced. This was no ordinary predator. It was intelligent, aware, and potentially dangerous. Mara slowly reached into her pack, pulling out a small flare she had salvaged from the ship. She knew it could scare the creature, at least temporarily. Liko looked at her, eyes wide with fear and wonder. Mara nodded at him, giving him a reassuring smile. Together they backed away slowly, keeping their eyes on the creature. The creature hissed softly, circling them, testing their movements. Mara's heart pounded in her chest. She whispered instructions to Liko, guiding him behind her, keeping him safe. Then with a deep breath, Mara ignited the flare. A burst of bright light shot into the air, and the creature recoiled, hissing loudly before retreating into the shadows. Mara let out a long breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Liko hugged her tightly, his small body trembling with relief. "You were brave," Mara said softly. Liko smiled faintly, his fear still present but mixed with awe. Mara realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to face it. And in that moment she felt proud, not of herself but of the bond that had formed between them. As they continued through the canyon, Mara noticed that Liko had become more confident. He pointed out rocks that could serve as cover, plants that could be eaten, and even signs of smaller, less dangerous creatures. Mara marveled at how quickly the child adapted, learning from her lessons and combining them with his instincts. She felt a deep sense of admiration and respect for Liko. This small child, alone in a hostile world, had survived through intelligence, observation, and courage. By evening, they reached a small plateau overlooking a valley filled with strange, luminescent plants. The view was breathtaking. The soft glow of the plants illuminated the valley, creating a peaceful, almost magical scene. Mara and Liko sat down to rest, sharing the small amount of food they had. Liko picked a glowing fruit and handed it to Mara, his eyes bright with pride. Mara accepted it gratefully, savoring the sweet flavor. As the sun set, Mara began to feel a deep connection with the child. She realized that survival was no longer just about food, water, or safety. It was about companionship, trust, and hope. Liko's laughter, his curiosity, and his unwavering trust had rekindled something within her. She remembered the loneliness, the fear, and the hunger that had consumed her since the crash. Now none of it seemed as heavy because she was not alone. That night, as they camped among the glowing plants, Mara and Liko practiced more ways of communicating. Mara drew pictures in the dirt and Liko copied them, then pointed to objects around them to indicate their meaning. Slowly, they developed a basic understanding, a silent language built on observation, gesture, and shared experience. Mara realized that this simple connection, this ability to understand and be understood, was more powerful than any technology she had ever known. Mara also reflected on humanity, how people could endure, adapt, and show kindness even in the harshest conditions. Liko was proof of that spirit, even though he was not human. The child's innocence, courage, and curiosity reminded her of the best parts of herself. She realized that the human spirit, combined with trust and empathy, could create miracles in the most unlikely places. As they settled to sleep that night, Mara held Liko close, feeling the warmth of his small body against her own. She whispered softly, "We will make it, Liko. We will survive together." The child murmured something softly in his own language, then closed his eyes. Mara smiled, letting herself relax for the first time in days. She thought about the challenges ahead. The planet was still full of unknown dangers. Food and water were scarce, and they would need to keep moving to survive. But Mara no longer felt fear alone. She had Liko, a partner, a friend, and a reminder of why hope was worth holding on to. The stars above shone brightly, mirrored by the glowing plants below. Mara realized that life, even in the harshest environments, found a way to endure. And sometimes it came in the smallest forms: a child's trust, a shared meal, a simple gesture of kindness. These were the things that could change everything. Mara's thoughts drifted as she watched Liko sleep peacefully beside her. She remembered the crash, the storm, and the first day of despair, and she realized how far they had come in just a short time. Together, they had faced fear, discovered hope, and begun to build a bond that would carry them through whatever challenges the planet had in store. Tomorrow would be another day of exploration, of learning, and of survival. Mara knew they would face difficulties, storms, strange creatures, and hunger, but she also knew that together, they were stronger than any challenge. The bond they shared, built on trust, care, and shared struggle, would be their greatest strength. And as Mara closed her eyes, she felt a sense of peace and determination. No matter what came next, she would face it with courage, and she would do so alongside Liko, the child who had changed everything with a few simple words and a spark of trust. The next morning, Mara awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft rustle of leaves in the alien trees. Liko was already awake, sitting by the riverbank, tracing patterns in the dirt with his fingers. Mara smiled at the child's habit of finding joy in small things. It reminded her how precious life could be, even in the most difficult circumstances. Today, Mara knew, would be a critical day. She had spent hours trying to repair a small transmitter she had salvaged from her ship. It was fragile, incomplete, and would barely work, but it was their only chance to signal for help. Mara explained her plan to Liko using gestures and pictures in the dirt. The child watched carefully, nodding as if understanding that this effort could change everything. Mara felt hope stir inside her. After breakfast, a small ration of fruit and edible plants they had gathered, the two set out toward a higher plateau Mara had noticed yesterday. From there, she could try to get a better signal for the transmitter. Liko ran ahead, darting among the rocks with surprising agility. Mara followed, keeping a careful eye on him, aware that even a small misstep could be dangerous. The journey was not easy. Sharp rocks tore at their clothes, the suns beat down mercilessly, and the ground was uneven, threatening to trip them at every step. Yet Mara pressed on, determined. She had survived the crash, the storm, and the harsh terrain. She could survive this too, and now she was not alone. Liko's presence reminded her that courage and hope were contagious, that even a small being could inspire immense strength. As they climbed, Mara noticed movement below. A group of strange creatures with armored shells and glowing eyes were approaching the riverbank. Mara froze, sensing danger. These were larger, more aggressive creatures than any they had seen before. Liko, sensing her tension, took her hand tightly. Mara whispered, "Stay close to me. We will be okay." Using the knowledge they had gathered over the past days, Mara led Liko around the creatures, carefully avoiding their line of sight. They moved silently, crouching behind rocks and blending into the landscape. Liko's small frame allowed him to move quickly and safely. Mara marveled at the child's instincts. He had survived here alone, and his understanding of the land was remarkable. Once they were safely past the creatures, Mara and Liko reached the plateau. From this height, Mara could see vast stretches of the barren planet, rivers winding through rocky plains and the distant mountains that marked the edge of their exploration. She found a flat spot and set up the transmitter, carefully connecting wires and turning knobs. Liko watched with bright, curious eyes, fascinated by the technology and the sparks of possibility it represented. Mara took a deep breath and activated the device. A soft hum filled the air, followed by a faint series of beeps. She held her breath, praying that the signal would reach someone, anyone. Time felt suspended, each second stretching into eternity. Then faintly a response came, a voice crackling and distant but unmistakably human. "This is Exploration Vessel Horizon. We read your signal." "Identify yourself," Mara's heart leapt. Relief, joy, and disbelief surged through her at once. She grabbed Liko's hand and pointed at herself, then gestured toward the transmitter. The voice responded again, confirming they were en route. Mara's hands trembled as she realized they would be rescued. After days of hunger, fear, and uncertainty, hope had finally arrived in the form of other humans. Liko looked up at her, his eyes wide with wonder. Mara knelt beside him, holding him close. "We're going to be safe now," she whispered. The child smiled faintly, but Mara knew the journey had changed both of them forever. The bond they shared, forged in adversity, could not be undone. As they waited for the rescue team, Mara reflected on the past days. She had faced isolation, hunger, and danger, yet she had survived. And she had not survived alone. Liko had reminded her of the strength of compassion, of empathy, and of human, and in this case, universal connection. It was not just skill or technology that had kept them alive. It was trust, courage, and the willingness to care for another being. When the horizon arrived, its engines roaring across the valley, Mara's heart raced with excitement. The crew landed nearby and a small team approached cautiously. Mara waved, signaling that they were safe. Liko clung to her, hesitant but curious about the strange humans. Mara stepped forward, explaining in gestures and simple words what had happened. The crew quickly understood and smiled, impressed by the bond between the human and the child. One of the crew members knelt before Liko, speaking softly in a friendly voice. The child hesitated, then slowly extended a hand, touching the crew member's arm. Mara smiled, seeing the trust extend beyond her alone. Liko had learned that kindness could exist even in strangers, just as Mara had learned that the child's innocence could inspire courage. As they were led onto the horizon, Mara took a last look at the barren planet that had tested them so fiercely. It had been harsh, unforgiving, and frightening, yet it had also revealed the best parts of both of them. Mara realized that survival was never just about escaping danger. It was about finding light in the darkest places, hope in the loneliest moments, and connection where none seemed possible. Once aboard the ship, Mara and Liko were given food, water, and a safe place to rest. Mara watched as the child ate eagerly, his small hands clutching the food with joy. She felt a deep sense of relief. They had survived together, and now they could begin to heal from the trials of the planet. The crew celebrated their rescue, marveling at Mara's skills and the child's resilience. Mara knew, however, that the true achievement was the bond they had formed. Liko had given her hope when she had none, and she had protected him, guided him, and shared her knowledge. Together they had survived not only the planet's dangers, but also the fear and loneliness that could have destroyed them. That night, as the horizon sailed through space toward safety, Mara and Liko watched the stars from the observation deck. The child pointed to the distant lights, his small fingers tracing patterns in the air. Mara smiled and mirrored his movements, creating their own silent language of trust and understanding. They did not need words to communicate. Their bond spoke for them. Mara thought about what she had learned from Liko. Courage could come in the smallest forms. Trust could be more powerful than fear. And even in the most desperate circumstances, hope could grow, nurtured by kindness, care, and connection. She knew she would carry these lessons with her forever. As the horizon sped toward the nearest human colony, Mara held Liko close and whispered, "You saved me, Liko, just by being yourself." The child smiled sleepily, leaning against her shoulder. Mara realized that she had been changed in ways she could not yet fully understand. Survival was not only about staying alive, it was about growing, learning, and embracing the small sparks of light that could illuminate even the darkest worlds. By the time the ship entered orbit around the colony, Mara and Liko had formed a rhythm together, a silent partnership that needed no words. They had faced the planet's dangers, hunger, and isolation, and come through stronger, wiser, and more connected than ever. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. As the colony's lights twinkled below, Mara knew that life would continue, full of challenges, surprises, and new experiences. But she also knew that no matter what happened, she and Liko had each other. They had survived because of courage, trust, and the simple power of connection. The child's words, gestures, and laughter had changed everything, reminding Mara of what it truly meant to be human, and what it meant to care for another living being. In the end, Mara realized survival was not just about strength, intelligence, or technology. It was about heart, and she had discovered that heart in the smallest, most unexpected form, a child who had changed her life forever. Together, they looked out at the stars, ready for the future, and for the first time since the crash, Mara felt completely, undeniably at peace.